Hello, hello, and happy Friday. Friday before Halloween. Very exciting for me. My original plan for video this week was going to be on spooky science in the natural world and sort of interesting facts about different plants and animals. And I think, speaking of spooky animals, my dog in the background is walking around. Um, I'm going to reserve that video for a few days from now because I've just had some interesting mail come in and I thought it deserved its own video. So I will get to that. But contrary to my outfit, I really wanted to talk more about color today because even though I've already done one video on color, I wanted to do a little bit more to talk about color palettes and the history of dyes and inks and pigments and watercolor and paints and all sorts of things. And I will relate that back to the mail I received. But for now, I'd like to start by talking about sort of color in general. I think probably the main way people are interacting with color in the world around them is multifaceted, but primarily, especially in the design world, we consider there to be a divide between screen color and printed color. So you have digital work, you have the light being emitted from your screen that any video you watch, when you watch television, when you interact with a billboard in Times Square that's made of pixels rather than paper or plastic. That's light that's coming from a combination of pixels, usually that has our red, green, and blue RGB. And when all three of those values of light are at their fullest, combined equally, that's how you get white light. And when there's no light coming through when it's dim, that's how you get black. And so there's the complex algorithms which allow our minds to, see every color coming through the screen. And obviously different screens replicate different colors differently, and that's like a whole engineering thing that I won't get into. But that's one of the ways that we interact with color. And the other way is, and this is of course created things, not just, nature. But the other thing that we're interacting with all the time is print or physical media. And that in addition to print is, paintings, photographs, physical things that are made up of, um, you know, colors, paints and wax crayons and oils and all sorts of other physical things that aren't being beamed to us through a computer. And so color is this obviously very complex thing, and I'll do my best to sort of summarize it. But when you're seeing color in the physical world, white light from the sun is bouncing off of these colors, and then the purple light is being emitted. So all the other colors are being absorbed, and then this purple, this violet is coming through to your eyes. And color science is super fascinating. The fact that we've only really understood how the eye and the brain work in the last few hundred years super well, and even then are still learning new things every day. Also super exciting. But yeah, this is sort of exactly my wheelhouse and why I'm doing this project. As I mentioned in the last video, I came to art and science both from this sort of love of the world around me and this interest in the visual world, which I'm lucky enough to take part of. And so just my personal love of color is what brought me both to painting and to certain parts of physics, which was my entryway into the sciences, and I guess neuroscience as well was my entryway. And philosophy, all these great things. But anyways, there's also another kind of way we see light in the real world, which has to do with how is getting in the weeds. But basically, it has to do with things like rainbows or butterfly wings or certain like feathers, and that has to do with how light is. I don't want to use the wrong terminology, but how like light gets reflected and scattered in a certain way. And basically, instead of there being, there's only a few animals that have actual blue pigment versus this sort of like reflective like quality where it's an illusion of your eyes. There's no like blue pigment there. It's the way in which there's like layers of biological material that scatter. I'm sure I'm using all the wrong terminology, but it's very interesting. Same thing with like the human eye. If you have blue eyes, there's like no like blue pigment that your body has created. It's just the way that like light is bouncing off of part of your eye. I have green eyes. There's like a whole other thing about how um, green and blue eyes are related genetically, and also like whether I don't think there's like a yellow pigment that's like added to the blue effect. It's just like another um, trick of the light, so to speak. But I should have done my research on this before I decided to do a YouTube video. But this is not what the video is about today. My point is mainly that the kinds of light that we're interacting with and the kinds of colors that we're experiencing are fairly different. And up until modern screens, and rainbows, which are an illusion, we pretty much were in the wheelhouse of like physically ground up pigments creating color. So some examples of why I think that's super interesting are in this book. There's no PR in this channel. No one is paying me to say any of this. In fact, I'm sure people would pay me not to say some of the things I say because I get things wrong all the time. But anyways, I love this book, Color Charts. It came out relatively recently, I think, or I got it relatively recently. And it's this sort of beautiful coffee table book analysis of different color charts. So at the end here, we have like different lipstick swatches, for example. And these are just paintings, they're illustrations, they're not actual swatches. And we'll get into that. But the beauty industry now is really super interesting because I mean, we can get into the politics of it later, but you know, companies and their representation of the colors that they're creating in their makeup is this, you know, billion-dollar industry. And so the being true in advertising to what your product is really important. And sometimes companies do that and sometimes they don't. And sometimes it's not a malicious thing. Sometimes it's just that it's really hard to photograph certain things. Like, for example, fluorescent colors is an excellent example of this, where regular cameras don't do an incredibly good job of capturing the way like UV and visible light come off of these colors. And so what you get is if you're trying to reproduce something fluorescent on a screen or printed without fluorescent ink, it's not going to do the original thing justice. So if you're releasing a neon nail polish color, for example, you have a lot of work to do with color correction, and you know, it's very interesting and a pain, especially if you're someone like I am who works with neon dyes and prints and things. And when I was doing more of that work when I was younger, it was a real pain to photograph because all the colors I was using were so bright. So this book is super interesting because it's not just paints, it has palettes and samples of like physical products that were being sold. So I think these are like dyed fabrics and threads, and it's, you know, it's showcasing different dyes versus pigments. It has, I believe this is a page of Warner's nomenclature, which I've mentioned, which was used to do sort of color comparisons of species in the wild. So it has a column of the name of the color. It has like a little swatch of the color, which I'm sure was a pain to reproduce in all these copies and to not have fade over time. And then it would have an example of an animal, a vegetable, and a mineral that each was those colors. So for example, the color, I don't speak Latin. We're gonna do bluish green in here, and the animal was the egg of thrush, and the vegetable was the underdisc of wild rose leaves, and the mineral is beryl. So those were all supposed to be, according to this, roughly the same color. So that's super interesting. There have been various needs and desires for people to have these kinds of books over time. And as someone who comes to these things from both the art and science perspective, I'm endlessly fascinated with stuff like this. Unfortunately, it's also become a personal addiction, and one that has been indulged by dear friends. I have a friend who, her maker name is Aquamarina, and she makes watercolors. And as a traditional paint maker, I get to talk to her all the time about what goes into making paints in a sort of traditional by hand manner. And her pigment collection is truly something to behold. And I'm just going to show you one of her palettes that she's made, not specifically for me, but I'd like to think she made it for me. And she collects these old tins that are vintage, and she'll fill them. This one was cigarettes. It's no longer cigarettes. It's now onto a what I like to think is somewhat healthier new life as a paint container. And she has these beautiful little ceramic half pans that she created. In the watercolor world, there's half pans and full pans. As you can imagine, a full pan is twice the size of a half pan, roughly. But she makes these from scratch with ceramics. So she molds that, or she makes them, glazes them, fires them, and then she also makes the paint by hand and then fills each one in. So these are the colors, and this is just the swatch sheet that I made to go along with it to test them. And so being connected to that world in that way is phenomenal for me. And I collect watercolors from different companies. I don't think this is the right swatch. This is from a similar palette, but this is from a company called Case for Making in San Francisco. And they're these little pocket-sized, whoopsies, watercolors. This is from a different palette, but you get the idea. And it's nice to have a little sort of cheat sheet of what the colors look like. And the reason for that is that some colors, like this one might look black to you or to the computer, but it's really because it's a quite transparent color. It's like this emerald. And it's really transparent. And when you just have layer after layer after layer, the mass tone, like the full darkness of it appears really dark versus a much more, let's see, much more opaque color like this. None of these are terribly opaque. More opaque colors look, I guess in here there's some opaque ones. And mind you, all watercolors are transparent to some degree, but that's not exactly what I'm talking about in terms of opacity. But you see this like bright red one. The reason it doesn't look black like one of these other ones is because there's an inherent opacity to the pigment that makes it darker. So if I layered red and red and red and red and red, it wouldn't get darker. It would just stay sort of true to that color. And that's because different pigments have different properties in terms of how they work on the page. And these are all super interesting ways in which color operates. I've also, throughout my life, been a printer. That's what the people were called before they were machines. And the kind of printing work I did was often in single layer separations. So I would work with letterpress printing or risograph printing, and each of those techniques requires you to individually separate the colors of the print one by one, so you don't have a computer that's doing that work for you. So for example, if I had a full color photograph of my face that I ran through just like a normal computer, the printer would be doing the calculations inside itself to determine, okay, well, the hair is everything is a mixture of CMYK, depending on what kind of printer you're using, but generally what people are familiar with is CMYK, which is, again, sort of the opposite to RGB. And, you know, maybe my hair is mostly yellow with some magenta and a lot of black, but there's no blue in it versus my eyes, which are, you know, or no cyan. So there'd be like cyans and yellows, and to dull it, you'd add black. But basically, when you're doing single layer printing, you have to do those calculations yourself. And you can do color separation within, you know, Photoshop can do that for you, where it's reading the file and then telling you what the layers are, or you could do it yourself if you're illustrating on a program like Procreate, which is on a tablet, and then you can draw in the individual layers yourself and play with the colors. So, and there's a million different ways to do things. I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination. I just have a little more experience in these things than someone who's not an artist. But yeah, so that's super interesting. And I think what I wanted to talk about today was some fun mail that I got. This is the sort of first experiment I'm performing for this channel, and it is not an experiment at all because I didn't do anything. What I discovered a little while ago is that there's a website, there's a company called Blank Beauty that operates out of the South. I maybe Tennessee, I'm not quite sure. The mail came from Tennessee. And they run this company where basically they will color match any photograph, any part of any photograph you send in, and then they will make a special paint for you from that color. And it's advertised as 100% accurate to the color that you choose. And this is revolutionary. And spoiler, this is nail polish, and I'm very into nail polish, and I've been into nail polish since I was like a very young child. But what's interesting to me is the way this technology works in a broader existence, not just within the nail community, which is huge and interesting and one of my favorite spaces on the internet, but also just in terms of how color works and how we perceive color. So what I want to talk about is the difference between RGB and CMYK and why a product like this or a company like this is very revolutionary and why I'm sort of surprised there hasn't been more news about it. So when we think about something like this, where, color obviously has been infinitely important to humans forever. You think about people think about people's like obsession with gemstones and how different they are and how prized they are because they're glittery, but also because of their bright colors. You think about how the dye revolution in the 1800s was crazy important because it allowed so many typically expensive things like the color purple, for example, to be made by much cheaper products like the offshoot of oil or coal. So you have all of these different synthetic chemicals that are now creating really, really bright and vibrant colors. And so that leads up to today where everything's made of plastic and everything, good or bad, and everything has these really vibrant colors. And you can have, small everyday objects that are made of bright colors that don't fade in the sunlight as easily as some things fade in the sunlight, like plant matter, for example, dyes or pigments made from plant matter don't do very well, typically. Some do, some don't. And the history of that is fascinating. And I have a ton of books about how to make your own dyes and the history of dyes and, the synthetic revolution, all of these other things. But sort of when I personally think about how important color has been for so many different reasons all around the world, it really is interesting to me to think about how this sort of level of sort of minute consumer interaction now is such that I can not only go to the drugstore and pick up a lipstick or a nail polish that's exactly the color I want, or I can go to Michael's or any other paint store and buy the kind of oil paint I want. But now I can like custom have something made for me. And obviously custom products were actually a much bigger thing way long ago when like all of your clothing would have been custom to your body instead of just a prefabricated thing. But I think this sort of understanding that people want custom goods and companies can provide them is really fascinating and I think probably a good thing. But maybe I don't want to get into the philosophy and politics of that too much either. But basically, if you are someone like I am, who's an artist, and again, this channel, I imagine, has like a sort of broad group of people listening who are interested in more of the science or more of the art. One of the things that I've come to learn as someone who's like a lay person originally before I came to oil painting, in terms of art and art history, is that you can really only get sort of specific colors of paint based on a few different things. One thing is that some pigments come from larger industries, so like the paint for cars industry. And so some of those pigments that were originally made for really brightly colored cars in the whatever 50s, 60s, once those colors are no longer in fashion, sometimes those colors become extinct because the chemical producers that make them no longer want to make those colors. And so these sort of like offshoot to the fine arts industry doesn't have a hold of those pigments anymore, or it's much harder to get them or whatnot. And pigments go extinct for a variety of reasons. Probably the biggest one is safety. Like manganese blue is a really beautiful sky blue that is no longer made because it's like not good for you. And lead white and all these other things. So Um, but basically what I realized is that I'm so used to being brought up in the digital world where you can theoretically make any color, even though someone who designs things and has them printed knows that that relationship between what you see on screen and what comes out of your printer isn't always one-to-one. But the idea that you could uh, I'm so used to going into a paint store and there being like four shades of purple based on four different kinds of pigments that exist or pigment mixtures of what already exists. And because it's not a big enough self-sustaining industry that can like make its own colors, there's not that much change. And which is a real shame to me as someone who's like ruthless in her pursuit of new colors, new kinds of painting, new kinds of interacting in the world. And as someone who is also a photographer and like likes to have a replication of the world accurately, especially in my paintings, like when I can't have some of the more vibrant like greens or blues or purples that I see in the world or want to represent, it makes me sad. And I don't want to automatically resort to using fluorescent colors because those also fade faster and they have their own chemical principles that and properties that operate differently. So anyways, all of that aside, when I found out that there's this company that will specifically color match a photograph, I was intrigued because paint is a physical thing in the world and pixels are not, or the pixels are, but the light coming out of it isn't as physical, or the photons are different from the paint, is maybe how to best describe it. And that's because computers operate on this RGB principle where, like, if you open up a document in Photoshop or Illustrator, it'll say immediately, do you want to produce in RGB or CMYK? And it'll do that switch for you, where if you're designing something for a website, you can have these crazy vibrant colors versus if you're designing for the printer, your printer can't automatically make some of those colors to an extreme brightness. And that's for a variety of reasons that I don't want to get into. A, because I'm not entirely perfectly educated on why that is, why you can't have like the crazy lime greens and crazy neon blues in ink. And also just because that is an engineering topic and something for a later video. And I don't want to lead people more astray than I was already leading them astray earlier about the butterflies. But anyways, what I was interested in is how could you possibly color pick a pixel and then have a paint made that's as vibrant? And this company, Blank Beauty, I'm not entirely sure what their process is, and I haven't emailed them or anything because I wanted to get my paints first and then talk about them and then see sort of how they stacked up. So I guess this is my only foray into being a beauty blogger, and it's my swatches of these colors. So I picked a lot of really interesting ones, and part of them are like really deep niche cut, like things that only bother people who are interested in nail polish things, and then some of them are just like funny. So the first color that I was interested in making was based on this toy car that my brother gave me when I was a child, and I named my dream car. And it's this super vibrant lime green. It looks kind of minty, maybe a little bit just because it's faded, and a bit because, again, cameras don't always capture fluorescent, vibrant colors super well. But this car is like so well loved. It has chips on the front. It has this lime green. The inside is this bright lemon yellow, and then it's covered in this gold fleck paint. And actually, currently, my toenails, I painted exactly like this, and I will not show them on screen. But before I did that with a different shade of green before I wanted to color match this. So I ordered this, I basically uploaded a photo of this, and it was really hard to get a good match, but I think they did like a pretty good job. And as you can see, like this isn't a fluorescent polish, so it looks less bright on camera than the car does. But without it being fluorescent, it's actually like pretty good. And I did, I'll show the test afterwards, but I did a test swatch on a little like fake nail, and outside of the bottle it looks even more realistic than it does here. So that's like a personal thing of like having wanted this color for a really long time. And I do have other fluorescent green nail polishes, but this was sort of the first thing I wanted to emulate. Another one on a bigger scale is my dad has a car that was handed down to him from his father, and it's this very specific mustardy yellow, and I wanted to match that as well. And so I don't know whether the photo I had didn't do it justice or whatnot, but this came out very sort of like dull, maybe a little green undertoned, a little pale. And I was really worried that it would also be sort of inaccurate to the thing. And then it showed up much better when I did a swatch of it. So I think there might be some sort of like pale white pigment in these polishes that sort of like attaches a little bit to the outside glass. Um, and that's like maybe why it looks different. All polishes typically look different in the bottle than they do on a nail, in the same way that like these paints, some of these, like 6 of these look black and then they're really, really vibrant colors. And that's a different issue. That's like an issue of transparency. But my point is you can't always trust the way a thing looks in a tube or in a bottle or in a pan versus painted in a thin layer on a nail or on the page. So I did a few more colors. They gave me a mystery color for free. 2 of these polishes were free, which was super nice. It's an extremely reasonable, like $9 a bottle. So very, very cheap first experiment for this channel. And then some of the other colors I did. So my main gripe in the nail polish industry is that there's very few vibrant shades of violet, and this isn't a nail polish issue. This is a worldwide issue. Very hard to find good shades of violet in oil painting or in any other kind of painting. There's pretty much there's dioxazine violet, there's ultramarine violet, there's a few other violets that are single pigment violets, and the main issue with a lot of purple paints is that because they're an admixture of usually a bright pink or red and a blue, it's better in general. I think a lot of people prefer to rely on single pigment colors because you know that they're generally going to be more consistent across the board than a mixture where you could, what if you accidentally had more red than the last batch? And so the color is slightly different, and also colors tend to separate, et cetera, et cetera. So there's very few like single pigment purples or violets on the market. And the only other like really good violet I've come across is this sort of fluorescent one from Case for Making, which is called lupine or lupin, which is named after a flower that we have in California. And I know for a fact that this color is a mixture, and it's probably a mixture of what I imagine to be ultramarine violet and then maybe a fluorescent pink or purple to get it that vibrant. And again, that has its own issues because those things fade over time too if they have fluorescence in them. But anyways, there's a YouTube blogger named, I believe, Kelly Marissa, I think. I hope that's her name. And she did this beautiful video that was all about just different shades of cool toned blue leaning purples in nail polish. And again, like the most niche part of the internet that you can imagine, but obviously something that would be interesting to me as someone who's like a nail polish and art and science aficionado. So she did like 20 different polishes, and it's that video and my own personal gripes come from this like issue where basically this nail polish company called Orly, which actually has their own create it yourself color lab in LA that I highly recommend, where you can actually go in and then make your own colors, partially based on like a screen and like choosing colors. And then there's like a person there that actually helps you with the process and mixes it in front of you, which is super exciting. And that's a more expensive process, but well worth it. You're interacting with the person. It's like a real experience. But anyways, I think that's like $24 a bottle or something. But anyways, that company created a color that was like a really neon violet a few years ago, and then they discontinued it. And so everyone on the internet in this circle of nail polish has wanted an identical one. So I was wondering how close I could get to that shade of purple. And I came okay close, not quite the same. I think, again, they're not using fluorescent colors in whatever process they're using to make these colors. But what is interesting is there was a video that one of the only things I could find about this company is that they have a robot in some Walmarts in the South, and the robot is like a color matching robot. And I guess it was based off of the idea of like house paint. I guess there's some companies that will perfectly match your house paint um, with like, different mixtures of different colors, and it'll give you the perfect color. And so the creators of this company thought, why not do that for nail polish? There's got to be a huge market for it, and there is. So, anyways, the other colors I tried to make were Baja Blast, like a super neon blue green, and then my favorite shade of green, which is this like very slightly bluish, bright Kelly green. And then I also wanted to color match the medicine ibuprofen because as someone who's had chronic migraine, or not chronic, but very bad migraines for the past few years, I've developed an emotional acceptance and love of the concept of ibuprofen. And because it has gotten me through many a medical disaster. And I also realized a while ago that the lipstick shade that is my favorite is actually just ibuprofen pink. So I matched a photo of an ibuprofen pill and to see if they could match that. And I think they did a great job. So these are the colors that I've made. This is the ibuprofen one. Again, it looks so different in the bottle versus on the swatch, and part of that is also like it looks different on screen too. So you're having so many different layers of distortion where the way things look to me are different than they are on the screen. But I think that's pretty good. And then the yellow again is so much more brighter and less green and more saturated and less like pale than it is in the bottle. And then you have the car. That's pretty good. And then you have these, and I think what's interesting is like this blue one, I like the color that it's producing is really a color that I thought would not be replicable from an RGB swatch into reality. And they did a pretty good job. This is the mystery paint, and then this is the purple. I'll show you some of the purples from my internet discussion. Basically, this is the ideal purple, and then this is the new one that the company Orly came out with that is sort of similar, but as you can tell, a little bit darker. And then the one that I made is this one, which is more blue, and it's obviously not going to be perfect, but it's more blue, and it's similar to this color from a company called Mooncat. But even mine is a little bit say a little bluer, darker, and maybe slightly more saturated. And they look very different on camera than they do in reality. But I think that's pretty cool. And I named this Morning Glory after the flowers that we have here. But all of this is to say this is a really cool and interesting company. I think their mission is very cool. I think from what I've seen of the videos they've put out, other people have put out of their stuff online, most people are color matching things like their car or something really sentimental like the pin that their grandma used to wear before she passed away. So very like important emotional things. Oh my goodness, I've been talking too long. But I think what's important is color has always been an emotional and important thing. And whether you're someone who's wearing your child's birthstone on a necklace, or whether you're, you have the color of your partner's eyes and you like painted something that color, there's all these other things that you can really encapsulate someone in such a small, personal way. I think that's really important and ties back to this like very long history of the way in which people have used dyes and precious stones and all sorts of other things to have these precious messages. There used to be this way of making jewelry where you'd spell out a little message or a name in jewelry based on the stone, the first letter of each stone. So you'd have like garnet is G, sapphire is S. So you could like spell out things. And that's a little different from this, obviously, but I think it's really cool. Oh, and also this company sent out these little swatch cards on plastic, so you could actually, they're painted on clear plastic so you can see through the paint, which is really cool and interesting and sort of different from this. This is 3 coats of polish on a white background, so it's going to look different. Um, but yeah, I think all of this is to say this is super fun and interesting. Every time I'm interacting with the world like this modern technology, I'm thinking of where these things are coming from, how they relate to these works that people were working on 400 years ago. And if I can spend $40 and have this sort of experiment and connection with the world in a way to sort of like personally feel like I'm um, getting to choose the products that I'm interacting with, or perfectly like imagine a world where you could perfectly match your skin tone for your makeup, or get the perfect shade of eyeshadow or lipstick. To someone who's not interested in makeup, that could seem vain or superfluous or like a waste of money. Um, but the world has always been, run on culture and ways of changing our appearances and painting ourselves, people of all genders and ages and backgrounds. And you think of the symbolic meanings of painting yourself in different cultures around the world, and it's not so superfluous. So yeah, if I can get someone to like learn a little bit more about these things or think more about um, the ways in which they interact with the world, or um, learn something new about paint shortages and pigment shortages, and the fact that nail polish enamel came originally uh, from like some of the colors have come from just car paint. Like there's a really vibrant shade of red that the pigment now is being used in watercolor paint and nail polish and all these different things. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's also a history of nail polish being associated, I think, with dental acrylic, maybe. I did a whole report on this in grad school, so I should remember, but I don't. So I will leave it there. And the company is called Blank Beauty, and this book is called Color Charts by Annie Vericon, Color Charts: A History. And yeah, hopefully this is sort of fun little palette cleanser video, so to speak, before we get into some more interesting science stuff later this week. And I'll be back to talk to you about all things bats and spiders and whatnot. So thanks for watching, and I hope you get a kick out of the colorful.